Everyone, I'm Aaron Fallouse. Welcome to Breaking Into Data. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of Promotable and your host for today. With us as well, we have Sam Koperski. He's the head of analytics and data at Kin Insurance. So this is going to be a really, really fascinating talk. Before we jump in, I have a couple of quick announcements. First things first, definitely we want this to be a really, we want you ask questions. Anything you have, feel free to either drop it into the question section onto the side here on the sidebar, or go ahead and raise your hand. If you raise your hand, you'll be able to ask them the question yourself. We'll all be able to see your face. I think it'll just make for a really interactive and really fun event. And in addition to that, both myself and Sam will be available after the talk. We'll be at one of the tables. So feel free to come and say hello. And then also obviously network with yourselves. We've got a good group here. We've got over 50 people. So it will be really, really great. And with that, a couple notes about Promotable. So we're a professional development platform that teaches the data skills required to do your best work now and become promotable in the future through industry-created, expert-led, and mentor-driven hands-on training. So in these Breaking Into Data events, we invite data experts and business leaders to share their expertise so you can network, learn actionable tips and techniques to move your career forward. We've also got, for those who want to dive deeper into data, we have live online programs to help take you to the next level. So the first is, of course, our recently launched Data Science Accelerator. So this is a new kind of income share agreement, immersive course, mentor-driven, and in partnership with 1871. So a really cool course. For those of you who are interested, please come by and say hello. Happy to talk more about it. As well, we also have our regular, best-selling course, which is a data for business course. That's for anyone who is a marketing manager, you're in product, you're in finance, you want to move beyond Excel, learn how to make better data-driven decisions. That's a part-time course. It's 5 hours a week. So feel free to come say hello either way. I'd love to learn more about you, why you're here, what you guys want to learn, what kinds of speakers you want to hear from. We want to just keep bringing you really, really good content that you enjoy and keep coming back for. That said, for anyone who wants to learn more, feel free to go to promotable.io. Check out the site. That last thing, follow us on Twitter. Give us a like on LinkedIn if you're on there. And then with that, Sam, we want to kick it off?
Yes. Thank you, Aaron.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm gonna throw up my screen here. There we go. And present. Oh, wrong slide, of course. All right. Aaron, can you see that? I'll take that as a yes.
Yep.
All right, great. Thanks for the intro, Aaron. My name is Sam Koperski. I'm the director of analytics and data at Kin Insurance. Kin is a insurance tech startup based in Chicago that does homeowners insurance. So a little bit about me. So I didn't really have a very normal path into data, which is like kind of sums up like the title of this presentation, in that you don't have to be a data scientist in order to be a leader in data. There's a lot more to it. So I started my career in accounting at a Big Four CPA firm. And after about a year at the CPA firm, I needed change. I needed something a little bit more immersive, a little bit more, hands-on, something where I could really feel like I was making a difference. So I took a job at Avant, which is another startup in Chicago, and kind of managed my way from the finance org into the data and analytics org just through self-teaching myself. So I would take, Python courses online. I would, ping various data folks within the Avant org to ask them for advice and ask them how they, build out specific analyses, and just became an expert through trial and error and through teaching myself. So I found opportunities within finance to, automate processes and, build cool analyses. So all of that experience that I had in accounting definitely helped me into moving into like the analytics part of the organization. And then post Avant, I started working at Deloitte as a data and analytics consultant. And then most recently, as I mentioned before, I'm now the director of analytics and data at Kin. So what is this presentation about? So this presentation is about building a data organization. So a lot of times when people think about, building out a data org, they think data science, they think cool analysis, they think, performing some, crazy algorithm to, grow sales exponentially. And that's all very true and part of the process. But the other piece of the pie is building something, an organization that's scalable. So you may think, some of this, the additional stuff beyond, building data science models is somewhat boring, but it's actually really interesting. And it also builds the foundation for your company to scale. So I'm going to talk about step by step the process for building a data organization. And one thing I want you to keep in mind is that if you're going through the process of building your own data organization, you have to remember that nothing will ever go as planned. There will always be issues, and you need to be able to quickly react to them and change pace, with the pace of the business. So if you have new data sets you need to add, or, there's a bug in the data, there's always things that are going to happen that you're going to need to quickly react to and change pace. So where does this journey start with building a data organization? So when and to give you context, I'm going to be walking through my experience at Kin, because prior to me joining Kin, there really wasn't an analytics organization. And I was tasked with the responsibility of building that out. So the first thing you need to do when you're starting in a data organization is to understand your stakeholders. And when I say that, I essentially mean getting buy-in from various parts of the organization. So the first people you want to go to with all of your plans, with understanding the current data org, is going to leadership and making sure that they are bought in on your vision. Because if leadership isn't bought in on your vision, it's going to be hard to get the resources allocated to you. It's going to be hard to add new data sources. So you really need to do a solid job of explaining, what your plans are and what the benefit of those plans will be for the organization in terms of revenue and sales and reducing expenses. The next thing you want to do is to understand who the data users are. So within that, what data sets are they currently using? How are they extracting the data? How do they reconcile the data? So this is more of an accounting term, but essentially saying, if you have sales in this data set, how do you tie those sales to, let's say, your bank statement, for example? And then the last thing is, what are the KPIs of the organization? So a lot of times when you first start a data org, it's very unclear what the KPIs are. And I cannot emphasize this enough to really focus on trying to understand what those are, because a lot of times folks will think that they have KPIs, but in actuality, they may not have it because, let's say, for example, someone's KPI is, we want to increase sales. Well, increasing sales is a little bit vague, and you almost need to take it a step further and say, okay, we need to increase sales by X% every month. So you need to make sure that these KPIs are very well thought out and have a defined goal in mind. So the next step is to survey the current data infrastructure. So obviously, like when you first start a data organization, it's going to be messy and it's going to be a handful. But you need to keep in mind that when you first start, you're not tasked with building it out in a week or 2 weeks. This is going to be a long, drawn-out process that you need to attack methodically. So the first thing you'll want to do is survey the data. So you need to understand what are the data sources. So in relation to Kin, those data sources involved a phone system, for example, in our operations center. It involved marketing analytics, which figures out your first touch for your various marketing data sources. It involves your text, your chat, your email, your automated email messaging. So you have to make sure that you can almost diagram out on a piece of paper all of the various sources and where they flow to. And the most important thing with those data sources is understanding where they go to, because ultimately you want to create this central source of truth for your data. Next thing is you're going to want to understand how the data is being ingested. So if it's a very resource intensive ingestion tool that they're using, or trying to understand what the costs are for ingestion, those are all extremely important. And then also understanding the vendors. The next step is to understand the current issues. So you want to make sure that when you're surveying the data, when you're interviewing the various people throughout the organization, you just need to understand what their problems are in order to best devise a solution for your data. And then the next piece is reviewing existing documentation. And most likely, if you're just starting with a data organization, that is going to be very lacking. So just keep in mind that that piece of the puzzle will be somewhat non-existent when you're first starting out. But to have at least something as a starting point is crucial. So the next step is to put out the fires. So obviously, in building out a data organization, you're going to have to keep one eye on building out the data, but you're also going to have another eye on these immediate fires that need to be put out. So in Ken's case, it was, I came on and it was like, we don't have a solid structure for our data, but there's all of these reports that are due that need to be sent to various different agencies, as well as internally. So you have to find a really true balance. And ultimately, you're just going to be working a lot of hours to try to figure that out. But you just have to keep in mind that once you put out the fires and address those immediate concerns, you'll be able to focus on building out the data organization. And that's actually a fun task in doing. But the other piece of the puzzle is, if you're doing these, putting out these fires, you're going to be able to understand the big picture by way of just doing data analysis. So you're going to see what those issues are that people have had in the past. You're going to understand a better way to build it out as you see what those issues are when you're putting out the fires. And then in addition to that, just make sure you're starting your documentation journey. Because like in the previous task, you may realize there's not a ton of documentation. So just start somewhere. Even if it's not complete. Just having something to begin with is super important, because ultimately, if you just put it off and say to yourself, oh, I'm going to wait until, our data is, fully fledged, like we have no concerns, like you'll end up pushing it too far. And when you start bringing on new individuals into the organization that need to be trained up, they're going to have nowhere to start. And then you're going to have to continue to use your own time to train these folks. So the typical needs that immediately need to be addressed are obviously accounting and finance, as well as external reporting, but those kind of go hand in hand. So just keep that in mind, that you're going to want to focus on, the audited items that get sent to external agencies first. And then in addition to that, like as you build out these initial reports and put out these fires, you're going to get immediate respect from everybody on the team to say that, oh, this person is, on their game. Like they're able to address needs quickly. And then that will just lead to buy-in in your overall vision for the data organization. So next step is getting buy-in from the organization. So that process starts with meeting with your various business stakeholders. So at Kin, what I did was I set up meetings with every part of the organization and asked them what they wanted to see as a part of their data org. This creates followership. And if you don't have followership, it's going to be very, very difficult in implementing this data org, because ultimately you're going to have a lot of issues and you're going to need those folks to help you QA the data as you build out these new data sets. So it is very, very crucial to get these people in a room and start discussing these various different needs as far as what they're trying to extract from the data. And then you'll also want to understand the pain points. So what is the speed to process the data that they currently have? Is there a lack of data integrity in tying out various different data sources? Are there data sources that live in silos? And with that, are there data sources where one organization is pulling sales, for example, and then another organization is pulling sales from a different data set? That's just going to create major issues, especially if you're reporting those out to external agencies. And then just generally think about what could be improved as part of what they're telling you. The next step is to do your own research. So perform your own analysis and research into the key drivers of the business. This way you can start to understand what are the KPIs of the business, because you may have folks that'll tell you, oh, this is what I think the KPI is. But if you do your own analysis, you may find that there's something hidden behind, whatever KPI someone is saying they're presenting, or there may be something that is overlooked and has been overlooked because there hasn't been a data person as a part of your organization. And then understand, what are the specific data sets that the business uses to make decisions. One thing I want to point out with the data sets that people use is there may be different cadences for when people need data. So, for example, let's say we have the sales organization that needs to make real-time decisions on staffing and lead allocation. You're going to want a data set that is flowing on a regular cadence of under a minute or in real time, so that those sales folks can make quick decisions and drive the business forward. Whereas for other folks, let's say risk analytics, they're going to want to see their data more in an aggregate view. So you don't have to worry about the cadence of data as much. And you should be more focused on the amount of data that you can provide them historically, so that they can make more predictive decisions and build out various different algorithms. And then the big thing too, just seek out the current data users. One mistake that I made at Kin is I spanned out my ability in reaching out to people to everybody within the org. And what I quickly realized is that some folks are not interested in data analysis, and some are very, very interested and they use it very frequently. When you're first starting the data org, try to focus on the people that already use the data. Those are going to be your heavy adopters, and those folks are going to be able to train the people that are not adopting it as fast as them. So that'll just give you the ability, if you're resource constrained on your data team, to say, hey, so-and-so, can you help this person, this operator within the organization with their data analysis, so that you can focus on, the bigger picture as far as building out your data org. Next step is to communicate your plan to your stakeholders. So you've done the research, you've interviewed the stakeholders, and you've put out the fires. So now you can share your plans. So this means sharing your plans with leadership, sharing your plans with the team leads throughout your organization. I just put an example of how we set up our data model here. I mean, it's really simple, but essentially we have a core data model that stores all of our raw data, and there are very, very few transformations built into the core data model. The reason why we do that is because we want to have an untethered source of truth for all of our data. And then from the core data model, we extend it out to various specific marts, data marts, as we'll call them. And the data marts function as the specific grain of the table that you're trying to analyze. So for example, the events mart is all of the various events that happen on our website, as well as the events that happen prior to our website. So it will tell you what the lead source is. It will tell you how many clicks the customer made. It will tell you various events that our sales managers and sales ops folks have performed on the various customers. The people mart is a more is a view for the marketing funnel. So it starts from when the person lands on our website and goes all the way to the point of the sale of our insurance policy, let's say. And then the policies mart is post-sale. So this view kind of shows you that when you're building out a data mart, you can kind of think of it from a customer journey perspective, where our events mart covers our marketing, our people mart covers our sales, and then our policies mart covers the life cycle of the policy post-sale. So it kind of covers every single section of this customer's journey, which just makes it really easy to understand for the user, because they know, for example, if I'm thinking to myself, oh, I want to pull the dollar amount of sales in the past month, I would immediately think, okay, that's the people mart, because the people mart covers from the initial, like the post, like marketing creation, the lead, essentially where the lead is created on our website, to the sale, and then the dollar amounts associated with that. So in these next few slides, I'm just going to cover very quickly just some various KPIs and metrics that we use at Kin to measure results. So for marketing and product, we have lead growth. We have experimentation results. So this is essentially kind of a holistic view of, understanding what various A/B tests performance are. And the way we look at those is typically driven from the conversion metric. So we always make sure that when we are running experiments, we not only measure the lift from that specific point of that experiment. So let's say, on page 1 of our website, we measure the results as far as conversion to the next page, but we never forget to measure what the eventual sales resulted in. So if, let's say conversion on page 1 was 75% for the variant A, yet it resulted in less sales than variant B, then we would want to make sure that we perform further analysis to ensure that A is actually leading to more sales. And then the next piece is marketing spend by lead source, pretty self-explanatory. Marketing CAC, which is marketing acquisition cost. That's essentially marketing spend divided by new business sales. That is a very, very important KPI that we use at Kin. And then we have marketing funnel drop off, which is self-explanatory based on the image to the right. And then we have here some operations examples. So one I mentioned before, conversion rate, how many leads are we turning into customers? And then of that conversion rate, where was the lead from? Was it from an inbound call? Was it from our website? Did it result from a chat to the customer or a text to the customer? And then we have assignment rate, which is very ops heavy, which is essentially saying how many leads did we assign to a specific sales rep? Because a lot of our sales are driven by our operations folks. So we need to measure how many of those leads, go from just being a lead and not having been spoken with a rep to having been spoken with. And then we have lead volume versus ops capacity. That's another massively important KPI, because if we have too many leads coming in and we don't have enough ops folks to handle those leads, then we're wasting money on the marketing front. Vice versa, if we don't have enough leads, but we have too many ops reps working, then we're losing money on the ops side. So it's always a consistent balance between the two. And then lastly, we have breakage rate, which is also a very important KPI, which essentially says if a customer cancels, what is the rate of cancel amongst all of our various sales? And that could result in, inputting the wrong data for that customer. We could potentially provide them with a bad experience and then they cancel because they weren't happy with our customer service. There could be a number of reasons, and we always want to be conscious of those reasons. And then lastly, we have insurance product. Insurance product is similar to what I mentioned before with the data marts. It would be contained in the policies mart. And the big ones we want to cover here are enforced policies. So how many policies do we currently have on our books? We like to break that out by various different other slice and dice methods. So we want to look at it by state. We want to look at it by product line. We want to look at it by, zip code or, various customer attributes. just breaking it out as much as we can to understand if there's anything driving an increase in enforced policies or a decrease in losses, because we really want to act fast and take advantage of any little tidbit of information we can find from our analytics. And then I'll just cover these very briefly. So, premium written by county, very self-explanatory, but also very important, because if we write too much in one county and we have a massive loss in one county, then we're going to have some major problems paying off those claims. And then we have coverage segmentation, which is similar to how we're breaking out the in-force policies. We want to break it out by, what customers had lapses in coverage, what are the various average premiums broken out by, different coverages. Are there specific policies that are exposed to future losses? And then lastly, we have loss ratio, which is our most important KPI as far as insurance product goes. And that's simply our losses divided by how much earned premium we have. And when I say earned premium, that essentially means we amortize our premium revenue over time, because our premium is paid upfront for the year. So we just take that, let's say it's $1,000, and then divide it out by 365, and then just add that revenue throughout the year. So once you build out the data organization and you have all your KPIs set forth and you're communicating with your data customers regularly, you want to make sure that you're surveying your data consumers over time. And the way we implemented at Kin, because we're slightly resource constrained because we're a startup, is creating this hub and spoke model. So think of the central piece as the hub, and that hub contains myself and a few other data analysts. And we ensure that everybody throughout the organization is able to pull, disseminate data, perform analysis on their own, extract data, trust that the data is accurate. And a lot of what goes into that is making sure you have data stewards, which are folks within the organization that you can communicate regularly with and talk about analysis and talk about issues to make sure that each part of the organization has their needs met. You also want to review KPIs regularly to make sure that the company is performing up to their standards. So one thing that I'll mention here is that a lot of people, when their KPIs aren't going as well as they should, will change those KPIs over time. So you just need to make sure that you create a level of review and approval to ensure that when you establish a KPI for a specific team within the organization, that they are regularly measuring up to it. And if they begin to exceed that KPI regularly, then you need to reevaluate the KPI to make sure that it is up to date and that you don't need to change it for various reasons, including increased sales or increased losses. And then always continue to educate your users. So set up lunch and learns, build this documentation, build a data dictionary, and make sure that you communicate this regularly, because as much as you think that you're educating your users, it may not be enough, or it probably isn't enough. So just make sure you're communicating regularly, that you do have these educational sessions available and you're open to helping folks and you have office hours, etc., to ensure that these people feel like they're being supported with their data. So the next step is, and I guess this kind of like encompasses throughout the process, is like, did I do this by myself? Well, definitely not. You're going to need a lot of various different skill sets when you're building out your data org. So as far as how Kin went, we used a data team as a service that was offered by this company called Bootstaff. And we hired a couple data engineers. We hired a few data analysts. And it's very important to understand the differentiation between a data engineer and a data analyst, because you still definitely need both, but they serve different purposes. So your data engineer needs to be experienced with your data warehouse and needs to understand APIs and can write Python and work in ETL and PySpark. Whereas your data analyst is more focused on the business. So you definitely need them to be savvy with SQL and Excel, but it's more about the raw abilities in performing analysis and like how to perform an analysis rather than technical chops, at least from my experience. So they need to understand the business concepts, the KPIs, and just be generally curious about data. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on, what we use as far as tools for kin, because I know it's important, and, people are always curious what various tools folks are using, and what works best and what doesn't work best. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those. We currently use Redshift for our data warehouse. And then for our ETL, we have this open source tool called Apache Airflow. And I'm not super versed in this, but my data engineer is. And another point to just span out your level of skills, because if I'm not good at Apache Airflow, we need someone on our team that is fully capable of taking that on. Obviously, you need to understand the general workings of it, but definitely need an expert in each of these areas. And then last but not least, we're using Looker for our business intelligence tool. And what I found with Looker is it's super configurable. And I've used various different other BI tools in previous roles. And Looker has been a really, really nice tool to use as far as building out a data org from scratch. Very configurable. And that is it. So that sums up the presentation. I just wanted to mention there's a few more presentations coming down the pipeline that I'll be presenting on, just to kind of reiterate some of the things that I just briefly touched on in this presentation, but also some other really, really cool things that we've been doing at Kin that I want to make sure that the data ecosystem knows about. So, for example, integrating data into your product is a really cool thing that we've been doing at Kin, where we've been building out some awesome automation and data science models, various OCR models to build in some documentation or some automation, so that we can speed things up as far as how we're interacting with our customers and how we're performing tasks internally. And then the other one I wanted to highlight is operationalizing data science models. So, as I mentioned before, I'm not a data scientist by trade, but at Kin we found a really cool way to operationalize data science models, and it's something that has always been a hot topic, because folks have you can build a data science model really easily in Python or in a Python notebook, but actually integrating it into your product and operationalizing it is a whole different beast. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything, feedback, please feel free to email me. My email is sam@kin.com. So super simple.
Awesome.
That is it.
I think that was really good. I mean, just based on the comments here, I think everyone's really learned a lot. I know I certainly did. We've got a couple of questions that have already come in. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Alex to the stage. Or Alexander, however he prefers to be called. He'll correct me as soon as he joins. And then for everyone else, feel free to drop your question in the question section, and I can moderate it, or I will go ahead and invite you to the stage as well. We would love to hear you guys ask the questions directly. So take it away, Alex.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. One question is about data science and insurance. I have background in healthcare, and healthcare is really regulated, and there's unique challenges because of that. So my question is doing data science in the insurance industry, what are some of the challenges from the regulatory angle?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So there are a lot of challenges. So for example, when we're submitting, or essentially every year, we have to submit what we are going to charge our customers. So we have this rating algorithm that we prepare every year, and it contains all of the different factors in how we price customers. So for example, the type of roof, the type of roof shape, the exterior wall finish of the home, all of those items we have to send to the state and say, hey, this is how we're charging our customers. So as far as building out data science models as it relates to pricing, it's a very touchy subject, as everything needs to be submitted to the state. So when we're building pricing models and various things of that nature, we always have to keep that in mind as we're building those things out. So typically, and how this is how Kin has started off, is we just start very simple. So we build our models that are easy to understand and able to be built into our product in a way that is scalable. And what we've been doing more recently is now we've been starting to think about how can we, build these more intense models that are a little more complicated and less easily understood by various external parties. But I think, now we're in a good spot to do that versus, when we first started, we needed to be very clear and explicit with our state regulators. So short answer is it's a very gradual process. And we're currently going through that process of trying to figure out how nuanced we can get with the state regulators.
The other question, thank you very much. The other question I want to ask you is about Florida. Florida is notorious for hurricanes, and it's just it's massive, right? So completely unpredictable, and it could wipe out entire neighborhoods. Being a little crass. How do you do that? I mean, that seems like.
Yeah, that's another great question. So we have various ways in which we do that, and I'll touch on a few of them. The first thing that we do is when we purchase leads or we have customers that come in the door, we take their address and we take their various customer attributes, and we try to understand the risk related to them. So we'll essentially have specific underwriting blockers that we implement to make sure that we're not over concentrating in one specific area in Florida, and then we're not exposing ourselves to too much risk for that customer. So a few examples related to that are, doing back analyses where we're looking at our full portfolio of policies that we've written and trying to understand where we are concentrated in specific areas. So for example, if we have, 20% of our policies are in the Tri-County area or in the Miami area, we're going to tell our marketing team hey, listen, we need to stop buying leads in Miami or stop advertising in Miami and then focus on another area so we can expand our concentration or spread out our concentration levels across, various different markets within Florida. And then we also have specific things that we pull in the policy. So we'll try to understand what the individual risk is related to a specific customer. So we check on, has this property had any claims on it historically? Has there been, based on aerial imagery, is the roof of good quality? It's just pulling as many data sources as we can to make sure that we're mitigating the risk in purchasing or allowing that customer to buy insurance with us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Next person. And also, everyone, if you don't want everyone to hear your question, you don't want to put it out there, we'll be here afterwards as well. Feel free to come up and ask individual questions after the talk. We'll be at one of the tables. Next up, I've got Linnell. So hand you the mic over here. And then, hi, Linnell. Thanks for coming.
Hi, can you hear me? Just making sure. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. It was great. I learned a lot. I know that when I was networking, I know there were quite a few data analytics students or people who have completed analytic programs like myself. So what are some things that are maybe some recommendations, maybe some tips that you could give us that as we're trying to enter into the data analytical field?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest thing as far as preparing yourself to go into analytics is to understand, and this is probably contrary to what a lot of people will tell you. This is from my perspective, it's understanding how to perform an analysis. So a lot of times, when I have new analysts starting, they will think they performed an analysis and essentially provide me a quick answer or make a lot of assumptions and then do a little bit of analysis and then submit their results.
Right.
The key to performing a good analysis is taking that step-by-step approach of first truly understanding the problem and then finding an example of that problem and then extrapolating that problem across your entire data set so you know what the actual impact is, and then going back and testing and ensuring that what you've pulled on that holistic analysis is actually true. That's the thing that I always stress at Kin. And when people like initially make assumptions, that's how I always go back, is I try to find an individual example of like what we're trying to do. So if it's like, from the previous question, like risk concentration, I'll pull a policy in, what I think to be a high risk area. I'll extrapolate that across our entire data set to say how many policies are in that specific area, and then go back and then make sure that I'm verifying my results from that analysis. So just truly trying to understand that entire process is more important to me, and when I'm hiring folks, as far as analytics is concerned, than actually those technical skills that, are always harped upon us.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then we've got someone who wasn't able to stick around but threw a question before he was able to drop out. And then I think it really touches on some of the stuff that you mentioned before about like changing your KPIs after you start them or these kinds of things. But he wanted to point out, Harsha, when you watch this later, you'll make sure that you ask your question. He loved your memes, so we'll throw that out there. But he also wanted to know if analytics, at least when it comes to Kin, if the reason that you do it is more focused on a specific insurance product or like a specific customer, or is it all across the board?
Yeah, so I think it varies based on the problem at hand. And that's another thing I want to point out is like a lot of folks will like come to me with like, hey, can you do this analysis? Like I was curious about this. And I always come back with like, you should probably come back with a problem first. Like, hey, we have a specific problem that we need to solve. So I always base my analyses off of, the holistic problem rather than like, starting from the person or starting from, like the higher picture, like broader picture. Because that, first of all, saves me a ton of time and like weeding through some of the, various requests that are not really getting to a solution or solving anything. And in that case, it varies. It varies if, you want to find a bug within the system, you're going to be looking at individual policies. And then you're going to be extrapolating that to understand what the impact of that problem is. But I guess to sum it up, just, it varies based from analysis to analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people even who run data teams at big enough companies that I think should know better. And you talk to them and you realize that it's like literally they're just running random analyses on stuff that like there's no question. They're just reporting stuff. And then they're wondering why they've spent like $2 million and they haven't actually gotten any return. And it's literally because there's like no question. Like they have Tableau or Alteryx or what a fancy tool that we talk about. And then they're just like, what do I do with this?
Yeah, no, that was a problem that I had to deal with when I first started is I tried to be so nice with it because I wanted to gain the respect of people and I wanted to, show my worth throughout the organization, and very quickly realized that, you need to be able to say no sometimes based on like what people are requesting of you. Like you really have to, and it may be hard. Like it's hard for me because I'm like somewhat of an introverted person to say like, hey, what's the problem you're trying to solve here? But it just saves me so much time and like so much anguish and like dealing with ridiculous requests. Maybe not even ridiculous, but just like things that aren't driving the business forward.
Yeah. Well, there's also that like unknown unknowns, right? I think a lot of it is really having to do, like, we don't focus enough on like having to educate your stakeholders and like what that means. But even like how to ask the right kind of question, or even like the question like to you, right? So you're like, I can't give you this answer unless you present it this way, because otherwise I can't, no one can solve this problem for you unless you've done that homework a little bit yourself.
And one thing that I'll add to that is like what I implemented at Kin. I had just been like taking requests because it was essentially just me when I first started, and that was fine and it worked for a little bit, but I ended up having to build a form that people had to submit, and it was like a 7-question form where it was just like very prescriptive of like, hey, what is your business problem? Are you sure this is a problem? Like, what have you done so far to analyze this problem? What do you think the impact is? Like, all of those things can really help you to weed out a lot of unnecessary requests.
We've got one more question from Zarek here. I'm just waiting for him to raise his hand so I can bring him up to the stage. It's going to be around engaging as a non-technical person or a non-data scientist. Like, how do you engage your data teams? I think that's a really good question because it's something that's really challenging, especially if you don't know what you don't know.
Yes, that is a great question, and I've seen it from both sides. Where like, I first started, in a finance org and had to go through that process of requesting data from people, and I realized looking back that I did a terrible job doing that. So the way that it's all about respect, honestly, what it comes down to, because it's like if someone respects your time, they're going to put some effort forth to try to understand the problem or try to do their own analysis prior to coming to you with a request. So when someone comes to me at Kin and says, hey, I looked at this thing and I couldn't figure it out, and then I went to this thing and I, got here and I did this, and then I went over here, and now, my specific question is, how do I get past this stage? And I'm like, yes, like this is a great question. Like, I'm happy to help you. But if it's like, hey, can you do this for me? That's when I'm just like, oh my God, like those are always tough ones to swallow and to sign out to my teams. So I always appreciate from a non-data person, if they're just like, at least try, I can see like in Looker, I can see everybody's usage. So I can tell if someone's just like asking me something just to ask me something or like hasn't done their due diligence. So as a non-data person, if I see some good usage and I see this person cares and, wants to learn, everybody needs to be a data science or data analyst in their own right, whether it be small or large capacity, to succeed in these like high impact, like fast moving companies like Kin.
Hey, Zarek, do we answer your question? Or I know.
Yeah, you actually, I think you got to a good chunk of it. I mean, my challenge is more trying to determine how to, in a large organization as the type I work with, there's a lot of different data sources, a lot of different data professionals, and a lot of users as well. And, I think just, that some of those basic principles about being kind and, respectful of other people's times, I agree. Those go a long way. I was just curious if you had, any thoughts on, just sort of, you talked about some of the pet peeves that you deal with and kind of, creating a forum for folks to engage with. I think that's super helpful. But some of it was kind of navigating the ambiguity of, somebody who's a non-data professional and trying to engage with folks who are in the data side, whether it's to, obtain access to information, more on a recurring basis, or, just try to, just like plug into a data source maybe that you don't have access to. So I think you got to a good chunk of it.
Cool. Yeah. As far as, accessing various data sources and trying to get to, what you're actually looking for, my recommendation is always, to first seek out the documentation that, hopefully there's documentation that someone put together, as far as like where you can access different data sources and like how you tie them out and how you verify them. So just like first seeking that out is always a good first step. And obviously reviewing those pieces of documentation, really goes a long way as far as like, because I know for a fact that like, having a good data organization, there is good documentation, or there at least is some, and data professionals really love when you ask about their documentation because they probably spent a lot of time building it.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Sam.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a great point. And then we're going to end with one last question that I think James put out there. And he's just asking if there is like any like go-to analysis technique to answer any industry questions, like running, he said, support vector or Bayes or something else. I mean, this is going to be pretty open-ended, but if there's something like when usually your standard question that you get is there like a go-to where you're like, let me run this quickly first and then see if it's worth diving into anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I would even like take it a step back and like so for experimentation, we're always using Bayesian to calculate results, but as far as like doing an initial analysis, I'm always starting like bare bones. Like I'm always like, and that's where you're gonna find like the thing that I think is like misconstrued in the data world is like you need to perform these crazy analyses to like find good tidbits of information to grow the business. But let's say like for a kin as an example, or a startup, or just pretty much any organization, you're going to cover 95% of like growing your business and building, growing revenue, reducing expenses by performing just basic analysis. So like your algebra class, your math class, it's not that complicated. And I think it scares people away from performing analysis when they think that they have to come up with like a crazy, algorithm or, some sort of data science model to come to a conclusion on something. That's really not the case. Like those are, more for like tweaking and like getting, that extra squeeze out of something versus, building or like finding like very like insightful things. You can really just start from scratch and like use your background in math and start from there instead of trying to get too nuanced with it. But yeah, definitely like a misconception. Great question. And obviously like you can get to that point, especially if you're seeing diminishing returns from like your baseline analyses. But I always have found that, throughout my time at Kin and various other orgs, like to be able to perform those basic analyses are much more important in getting to a solution quickly versus, building out intense models.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think if that's the one thing we can take away is like you don't have to dive into like hyper complex stuff where sometimes just doing like some basic EDA in Excel is going to get you half of the way there, and then from there you can say, okay, well at least now you know what you're talking about, you know what to look for, and that it's funny that you mentioned that because our speaker next week, he's a director of analytics over at Marriott, and of all the things he wanted to talk about, literally he was talking about let's talk about which metrics actually matter, and like let's avoid all these vanity metrics. Like why am I getting 25 things when we make decisions based on 3? And it's like, but to do that, you do some basic EDA, and you're like, hey, actually, these are the 3 things that are most valuable. So, with that, everyone, I have included YouTube channel where this talk and all our previous talks are posted. Also our LinkedIn channel. Definitely please like them both. You've already got Sam's LinkedIn profile. I'll throw it in the chat again for anyone who wants to connect with him later. And we'll both be hanging out in the lounge as soon as we're done here. We'd love to speak with you all one-on-one. So feel free to come on by, and we'd love to talk to you. And then definitely come back next time. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you, everyone.